The rifle clattered against the marble floor for the second time, the sharp echo cutting through the silent ceremony like a gunshot. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Before anyone could react, an old woman stepped out from the front row, bent slightly at the waist, gray hair pinned neatly beneath a modest hat. She reached down, lifted the ceremonial rifle with steady hands, and in that single quiet motion, stunned everyone watching, because she didn't lift it like a civilian. She lifted it like someone who had carried the weight of war. If you love your country and respect your soldiers, hit that subscribe button right now. The ceremony had been planned for months, rehearsed down to the second. The sun hung low over Arlington, casting long golden lines across the headstones, each one a name, a life, a sacrifice. The ceremonial guard stood in perfect formation, young men barely into their 20s, uniforms pressed so sharply they looked carved from stone. Their movements were meant to be flawless, mechanical, immune to fatigue or fear. But perfection is fragile, especially when thousands of eyes are watching. Private Daniel Reeves felt the sweat trickle down his spine long before his grip began to falter. The rifle was heavier than it looked, heavier than it ever had during practice. Not because of its weight, but because of where he stood. His grandfather was buried somewhere behind him. He could feel it, like a presence pressing between his shoulder blades. The silence stretched. His fingers tightened. Then, just for a fraction of a second, his hand slipped. The rifle struck the ground with a sound that seemed impossibly loud. A mistake like that wasn't just embarrassing, it was devastating. The crowd froze. Officers stiffened. Daniel's heart slammed, so hard he thought it might tear free of his chest. He bent to retrieve it, hands trembling, mind screaming at him to move faster, cleaner, better. And then it happened again. The second drop was worse. Murmurs broke out, low and sharp. Somewhere, a camera clicked. Daniel's face burned beneath his cap. This was supposed to be an honor, not a public failure. He reached down, but before his fingers could close around the rifle, another pair of hands entered his vision. They were old hands, lined and pale but steady, strong in a way that didn't need muscle to announce itself. The rifle rose smoothly, no hesitation, no struggle. The movement was precise, practiced, almost elegant. Gasps turned into stunned silence. The woman straightened slowly, the rifle held perfectly against her body, barrel aligned, posture exact. Anyone who knew ceremonial protocol could see it immediately. This wasn't luck. This wasn't instinct. This was memory. Whispers rippled through the audience like wind through leaves. Who is she? What's she doing? Someone started to stand, then sat back down, uncertain. The commanding officer took a step forward, then stopped, as if rooted to the ground. The woman turned toward Daniel. Her eyes were sharp, clear blue, unclouded by age. She looked at him not with judgment, but with understanding so deep it hurt. With a small nod, she handed him the rifle, correcting his grip with a gentle adjustment of his fingers. Her voice was low, barely audible, but those closest heard it. Breathe. The rifle follows the heart. Daniel swallowed hard and nodded, unable to speak. As she turned back toward the crowd, a man in the front row recognized the insignia pinned discreetly beneath her coat. His breath caught. He stood abruptly. That's impossible," he whispered. The ceremony had stopped. No one had ordered it to stop. It simply had. Time seemed to hold its breath as the old woman removed her hat. Her hair was snow-white now, but her bearing was unmistakable. She faced the commanding officer and snapped into a salute so sharp it seemed to cut the air. The officer's eyes widened. Slowly, instinctively, he returned the salute. "Ma'am," he said, his voice unsteady. "May I have your name?" She paused, glancing at the rows of headstones, at the flags, at the young soldiers standing rigid with awe. When she spoke, her voice carried across the crowd, calm and resonant. "My name is Eleanor Whitaker," she said. "Retired." A stunned murmur rolled through the audience. The name meant nothing to most of them, but to a few, very few, it meant everything. Eleanor Whitaker had not planned to come forward that day. She had promised herself she would sit quietly, hands folded in her lap, and watch the ceremony like any other civilian. She had buried Too many ghosts to want attention. But when the rifle fell the first time, something old and unyielding stirred her chest. When it fell again, that something stood up. She remembered her first rifle, heavier than the one she'd lifted today. Cold metal biting into her palms as a drill instructor barked orders. Disbelief thick in his voice because women weren't supposed to be there. Not really. Not back then. She remembered proving him wrong. Eleanor had been 21 when she joined, lying about her age, her resolve forged by a war that had already taken too much from her family. She had marched, trained, bled, and learned to move with precision because mistakes cost lives. Over time, she became something rare and dangerous, a symbol. The woman who never dropped her rifle, the one they trusted with ceremonies no one else could handle. But history is selective. When the war ended, Eleanor was thanked, dismissed, and quietly erased. Medals were boxed away, her uniform folded and stored. Life moved on, as it always does, over the backs of those who carried it forward. Now, standing before a crowd decades later, she felt the weight of those forgotten years lift slightly. The commanding officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, were you assigned ceremonial duties?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "Among other things." He hesitated, then nodded. Would you honor us by completing the sequence?" The crowd leaned forward as one. Eleanor took a breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped into position. The young guards watched her with a mix of awe and disbelief. At her silent signal, they adjusted, forming around her. Music resumed, tentative at first, then strong. Her movements were flawless. Every turn, every step, every lift of the rifle was executed with absolute control. The years melted away. In that moment, she was not an old woman. She was the embodiment of discipline, sacrifice, and pride. Tears streamed openly down faces in the crowd. Veterans stood, saluting through shaking hands. Daniel felt his chest swell, his earlier shame replaced by something else entirely: purpose. When the final note faded, the silence that followed was sacred. Eleanor lowered the rifle and returned it to its place. She faced the crowd once more. "I didn't come here to remind anyone who I was," she said softly. "I came to honor those who can't stand here anymore." She placed her hat back on her head and began to walk away, but the applause stopped her. It rose slowly at first, then thundered, echoing across the cemetery, rolling over the stones like a promise. Daniel stepped forward, voice cracking. "Ma'am, thank you." She nodded at him, eyes kind. "Carry it well," she said. "All of it." Eleanor took her seat again, just an old woman once more, hands folded, heart steady. But everyone there knew the truth now. History hadn't disappeared. It had simply waited. And somewhere between the fallen rifle and the steady hands that lifted it, an entire nation remembered who it was and who it still could be. From which part of the country are you watching on this video?